and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big green, my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 9:30 a.m. on Monday 11th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Good morning, thank you for joining us. So the terror threat continues 22 years on from the 9/11 terror attack. There are warnings that the terror threats from Al-Qaeda and ISIS is not over.
Ban the bully. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, wades in. She says she's seeking urgent advice on banning American bully XL dogs after an attack in Birmingham went viral this weekend.
Spy showdown as the Prime Minister returns from the G20 summit in India. He's facing calls to designate China as a national security threat, as there seems to have been a spy at the heart of British government.
Pensions in peril. Rishi Sunak has refused to commit to having the pensions triple lock in the next Tory party election manifesto. Could this further divisions in his party?
It's interesting, that spy story, because we can't confirm who it is as of yet.
No, but almost certainly there'll be a statement by a minister, because we know somebody has been arrested in connection with being a Chinese spy in the Commons, working for a very senior Conservative MP. Possibly, if he's not named, an MP will name him under parliamentary privilege.
That's very
We're
good
entitled to know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Frankly.
Yeah, we are entitled to know. And those dogs, let us know what you think about that, the banning of these XL bully dogs. At least that's what
They're horrible.
is suggesting. They are awful. They are responsible for the vast majority of dog attacks in this country. Why would anybody own one? GBViews at gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here is Ray Addison with your latest news.
Thanks both. Good morning. It's 9:32, our top stories. Terror suspect Daniel Khalif has arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court to face charges of escaping from Wandsworth Prison. The 21-year-old former soldier was arrested in West London on Saturday morning after a 4-day manhunt. He's last been seen walking away from a bid food van near Wandsworth roundabout. Khalif had been on remand after being charged with terror offences in January. British search and rescue teams have been deployed to Morocco following the deadly earthquake which struck on Friday. In a statement, the Foreign Office said 60 specialists are in the North African country, along with search dogs and rescue equipment. More than 2,100 people have died as a result of the 6.8 magnitude quake. Well, as we've been hearing, the Prime Minister is facing calls to designate China as a national security threat. It comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for Beijing. According to The Times, the Home Secretary is urging Rishi Sunak to relabel the country as a risk to Britain's safety and interests. Mr Sunak says he confronted the Chinese Premier at the G20 summit over unacceptable interference in democracy. And Luis Rubiales has resigned as president of the Spanish Football Federation. It comes after he kissed Jenny Hermoso on the lips following the World Cup final. Hermoso said the kiss was not consensual and submitted a complaint to Spain's High Court. Rubiales has tweeted that he will defend his innocence. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com. Now let's get straight back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning to you. It is 9:34 Monday morning. So the Prime Minister is facing calls to designate China as a national security threat.
Comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested back in March on suspicion of spying for Beijing.
The Prime Minister is facing calls to designate China as a national security threat. Political commentator Piers Pottinger joins us in the studio now. Do you think China should be a national security threat? What would the implications be of that politically for us if Rishi Sunak was to make that claim?
Well, I think there's no doubt in my mind that China is a national security threat already, and I don't think we need to formalise it as such. And we do have to look at the relationship very carefully. But what's very interesting about this alleged spy situation, first of all, it beggars belief that he's on remand. And has been since March. I mean, spies, I think there was a chap called Philby, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Skip the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I just don't understand. Obviously, I wouldn't put him in Wandsworth.
Yeah.
But
you mean he's on bail?
He's on bail.
Yeah,
he's out on bail.
He is.
I mean, that
so he could be anywhere.
To me.
He could be anywhere.
Absolutely, and goodness knows what he's doing. And the newspaper who named this person, if it is this person, couldn't get hold of him for comment. So goodness knows, as I say, where he is. But the interesting thing is that the security for Parliament and the man who issues parliamentary passes is a name I'm sure that you know.
Sergeant at Arms.
It's Yugbana Oye, who was appointed 3 years ago by that wonderful speaker, John Bercow. And up until then, the Sergeant at Arms, who's in charge of all parliamentary security, and can actually technically make arrests without a warrant. It's a very old office.
Yeah.
But up until then, they were major generals, rear admirals.
Yeah.
They were people with military or defence backgrounds. Suddenly, this man, who was an electrician, is appointed by Bercow. And I do hope that someone will, this man, by the way, when he was appointed, made a big song and dance about it, courted the press. And I do hope he'll be talking about security in the House as far as he can, because the other problem about all matters security, particularly of national importance, people can immediately say, oh, it's a matter of national security, I can't say anything about it. So it gives the government and everyone involved a perfect excuse for saying nothing. But this is very serious. And a few months ago, the Deputy Metropolitan Police Commissioner in charge of counter-terrorism said that there were the number of inquiries into potential spying had quadrupled.
Incredible.
So it is a very serious issue indeed.
And China is the biggest. And I was just looking at what Rishi Sunak said, Piers. When he got into number 10 a year ago, China is the biggest long-term threat to British and the world's economic future and security. We must no longer be rolling out the red carpet. 2 or 3 weeks ago, his own Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, went to China, to Beijing, didn't get to meet the President, but met the Deputy Premier, effectively rolling out the red carpet to the Chinese. What's happened?
I do actually accept James Cleverly's comment, which was it's better to talk than not. And I do think also, if you have concerns, as we clearly do, it's better, as Rishi Sunak did in the G20 meeting, face-to-face with the Chinese, tell them what we think. And also, it's important they know that we realise what's going on. But there is no doubt China poses the biggest economic and beyond that threat. I mean, particularly in Taiwan. I would be very nervous about living in Taiwan these days because they seem... And also the Chinese economy is not doing as well as it was. And once the leaders in China are under any kind of domestic pressure is when they start looking out and start doing things that might be described as a little reckless. So I am concerned about the security, but I do hope Lindsay Hoyle, the Speaker, will be making a statement later today, and it'll be very interesting to hear what he says about parliamentary security and the issuance of passes, because it's surprisingly easy to get a pass to be in the House of Commons. And once you're in there, you can inveigle your way.
Yeah, and of course, if you had an ex-military figure like we used to have before as Sergeant-at-Arms, they're more steeped in it, aren't they?
Well, one would think that the vetting procedure would be very thorough and I would be much more confident about that. I don't wish in any way to taint the name of Mr. Oye, but he did seem an odd choice at the time.
Well, it was Bercow trying to be modern.
And it's typical of John Bercow to try and do something different just for the sake of it.
Now, we're hosting a major AI conference in this country in November. This is the Prime Minister trying to put us at the fore of a worldwide revolution in how to harness the benefits of it. Should China be invited? I'm not sure they should.
No, I don't think so. And I also think that anyone who's still got a Chinese security camera or is using Huawei technology... I mean, use your sense, you know, I mean, where's the common sense? Ian Duncan Smith's very sound on this. And I do think that we've got to treat China almost as, well, in fact, just as badly as we do Russia in terms of the perception and how we deal with them. But we should continue talking. It's when you stop talking, things get worse.
How do you think Rishi Sunak did at the G20 in India?
Well, I mean, Modi was his great friend. They're both, of course, practicing Hindus. If you saw the picture of the incredible bear hug Modi gave him, they're obviously close friends. I personally thought it was a very odd time to announce the £1.6 billion to go into the Green Climate Fund, when at the same time back home, he's saying we may have to cut benefits for people. Once again, it seems to me that although Sunak's a very intelligent man, when it comes to making government announcements and explaining the rationale, they are very poor at it.
But that's presumably because he's showboating to his other globalist friends. That's why he chose that moment, because
Well, I
it
don't think
renders him
showboating
popular.
is fair, Bev. I think it is important for Britain still, if we want to have an international role, to show some leadership and to show some profound gestures, make profound gestures, and this was definitely the 1.6 billion. I mean, Modi is now the leader of the poor world, the global south, as it's called. Bringing the African Union into the G20 makes him an incredibly important figure, and Britain's traditional relations with India, while it's still called India,
going to change its name, isn't it?
It's going to change to Bharat, almost certainly, and they used Bharat right the way through the G20. And India, of course, comes from the word Indus, the river, and Bharat was a name used in 1500 BC.
You see, I think my issue is just that if you're going to put that amount of money onto a global green fund on the same week that we're signing an energy bill here where British people could be fined £15,000 for not having the right type of boiler, that tells me his priorities are international and not national.
Well, that, of course, is the message, maybe unintended message that we take from it. And that's what I mean about their communication. If he explained this properly, which he didn't, rather than just suddenly announce it when he's a long way out of the country, at the same time as talking about the real cost of living is still going to be bad and benefits may be cut for people. I mean, you don't do those two things at the same time. That's basic political sense.
I've got to ask you about dangerous dogs. You and I are old enough to remember Ken Baker's Dangerous Dogs Act.
Yes.
I don't know what job he was doing then. Was he Tory chairman under Margaret Thatcher's regime? Went horribly wrong. Now, there's talk it's on the front page of The Sun and The Mirror to ban these XL bully dogs, which are responsible for the death of 11 people. I don't know if you've seen the video, Piers, in Birmingham, the dog. Just horrific.
It's terrifying. I mean, these dogs shouldn't be... I mean,
if you're listening on the radio, we're just showing it now. This dog attacking various people at a filling station. People attacking the dog with a shovel to no avail. They're just out of control beasts.
Well, they're trained fighting dogs, and dog fighting is illegal, and they shouldn't. These dogs are illegal. If they're not illegal, they should
be.
Yes.
Sooner
I
the
prefer
better.
Dandy Dinmans myself.
These dogs are also responsible for killing one dog a day in July in this country. Not just attacking human beings, but killing other dogs.
I mean, just the way they're built. I met one in a studio recently, and she tried to introduce me to it. I said, nowhere near, please. Nowhere near.
Don't blame
this is the dog. She said it's the owners that are the menace. Well,
No,
maybe
rubbish.
it's the dog. They've got a violent streak.
Yeah, well, I mean, the dog fighting they do professionally for money, and I mean they're criminals.
It should be a simple piece of legislation, shouldn't it? But they got the dangerous dog one horribly wrong, if you recall.
Yes, they did.
Right, Piers, I think we are moving on now. Thank you very much for kicking us off this Monday morning. Nice to see you. Let us know your thoughts this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com, as always. It is, of course, September the 11th. It's 22 years since a plane hit the Twin Towers in Manhattan.
Senior security experts have told GB News large terror groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS could re-emerge as significant threats to the UK. There we are, we've been talking about China, of course. Authorities are currently tracking 800 live terror investigations.
Our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, brings us this exclusive investigation.
It was a brutal and shocking attack, heralding a new era of international terrorism, where groups like Al-Qaeda and then ISIS chose often soft targets in Western cities, crowded places to cause maximum carnage. But in the 22 years since 9/11, those big organised terror groups have been severely degraded by concerted action from coalition armed forces and security services. Intelligence analysts over there at MI5 are constantly scanning the horizon for new threats. They are out there. Al-Qaeda, ISIS and associated groups are greatly diminished these days, but they could easily re-emerge. The terror groups are now scattered around multiple countries in the Middle East, Africa and Asia, and continue to launch more localised attacks. But extremism experts warn they could become a potent threat to the West again, as governments focus more on state threats from Russia, China and Iran.
I think the big fear has to be that if that pressure is lifted off, things might regress. And if we look at the underlying problems that sort of led to the emergence of a group like Al-Qaeda, that led to the emergence of a group like ISIS, that led to the rise of the sort of extreme right wing as a terrorist problem, around the world, really, none of those problems have really been resolved. And a lot of them are still bubbling below the surface.
For now, the predominant threat is from lone individuals radicalised by the propaganda arms of both Islamist and right-wing extremist groups. But with increasing ungoverned spaces in a number of countries, there is real concern that those more organised groups could once again flourish.
That's what they're really concerned about. Areas of Afghanistan, say, that don't have much rule of law over them, pockets of Syria, bits of North Africa where they might reinstate themselves. And make no mistake, that jihadi philosophy, that jihadi theories, the aim to create a jihadi state is still there amongst certain individuals.
UK authorities have told GB News they are currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. The majority relate to lone individuals, but also to more organised plots and threats from state actors. More than 2 decades after 9/11, the threat is far more diverse than it's ever been. Mark White, GB News.
So we're joined now.
Chilling, isn't it? Just watching it still.
Isn't it?
20
We're
years.
joined now by experienced American journalist Carl Bostic, who's with us in the studio. Good morning. We were just saying, everybody remembers, don't they, where they were when this happened. Where were you, Andrew, before I come to you, Carl?
I was actually in Safeways. I was working on the Times. I got a call saying, you've got to get back.
So you're working on the till,
so
then?
quick. No, not quick. You've got to get back so quick because you're not going to believe what's happening. And what's mesmerised us, I saw the second plane collide with the World Trade Tower.
Yeah.
I think we knew it was serious.
Yeah, I was working for ITV at the time. I was about to go off and do a Formula One Grand Prix, and it was the only sports event that went ahead that weekend, because it was on the Tuesday, wasn't it? And so we flew out on the Thursday. And I remember at the time thinking that Bernie Ecclestone had made the wrong decision, that it would have been more respectful to not go ahead. But actually now I think he was dead right, because we can't have life stop in its tracks because of events like this, can we? Where were you, Carl?
Actually, I was in Jerusalem covering the Intifada for one of the major networks. The Intifada was at its peak. Then you had a wave of suicide bombings, and I was working on a story about a suicide bomber at a pizzeria. And then all of a sudden, our driver came rushing in saying, Carl, drop what you're doing, look at the TV, and those horrific images of a plane literally slicing through the building, and actually footage you'll never ever see again, because you're haunted by it, of people actually jumping from the 90th floor or 100th floor. And automatically then I was redeployed. I had to go back to London and then go to North Afghanistan via Tajikistan, because that was the safest place to go. So I was there for the first 2 months of Afghanistan, as the war began, the war on terrorism in Afghanistan, which lasted for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
Just amazing.
What do you make of Mark's point that they could be regrouping Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Are they still a major threat?
You need to look at it in a certain context, because one of the reasons why the U.S. went into Afghanistan was to make sure that it would never, ever become a haven for terrorists that could strike on U.S. soil. That was kind of one of the conditions for the pullout, but it was a chaotic and messy one. So, yes, you still have al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. Yes, you have the Taliban almost, shall we say, enabling them. But you've got a rival extremist group, the Islamic State, which they're the ones behind those suicide killings of U.S. soldiers at the airport when 13 were killed. So you've got a very, very fertile situation, and you actually have jihadists who are bored because there's no more enemy to fight. They're going over into Pakistan, for example. But the real story is this now, because these extremist groups, they become almost like corporate networks, and they shifted their assets to places like Africa. Like I've worked in places like Chad before, and I've also covered the Sahel. Now you've got the world's longest military corridor stretching from West Africa, from Guinea to Sudan to Chad, 3,000-mile-long corridor. Why is that important? Because now you've got Islamic jihadists there who can freely travel across borders. And now you've got the Niger coup, for example. And now it's being reported that nearly half of all deaths from extremist groups, jihadist groups in the world now come from Africa, from the Sahel region of sub-Saharan Africa. So it's shifted from Afghanistan to there. And the reason why it's a worry, because they can still cause more trouble, stir trouble, and they could still maybe launch attacks overseas. And that's why the French and the US are still very worried.
The amounts of money that these terrorist organisations manage to generate and spend is eye-watering, Carl, isn't it? They are incredibly wealthy networks now.
Yes, I mean, in fact, that was part of the original problem with 9/11. Like, you had 19 hijackers, 15 of them Saudi, 4 planes hijacked. How do you plan that kind of thing? How do you fund that kind of thing? Osama bin Laden came from one of the wealthiest families in Saudi Arabia. We still don't know what kind of culpability exists with the Saudi government. That's why you still have detainees at Guantanamo. You have dozens of them, so to speak. The so-called mastermind of 9/11, that's Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he's still there. And then the 9/11 families, they got some really disturbing, troubling news that actually maybe a plea deal was underway to free him and others in exchange for information about the involvement of Saudi officials, what they knew. So when you talk about where does the money come from, it's not just private financing. We don't know if it's governmental or not, if they're state actors or not. That's really part of the problem we're talking about right now. And then one more kind of footnote, letting you know just how much this is still a haunting thing. Only days ago, they announced identities of 2 more remains from 9/11. More than 1,000 people still have not been identified of those 3,000 victims.
Wow.
So how, just take us to the car. How did that come about?
Well, because now you've got advanced DNA methodology.
Right.
Okay, and so you've got the remains of more than 1,000 people found, but unable to identify them.
True.
So with these advances now, they're saying we've now identified a man and a woman, and their families have been notified. This just happened days ago. It's still going. So this is heart-wrenching and just traumatizing.
But also, for those 2 families, at least, perhaps a little bit of comfort that they can get some closure now?
It's some closure, but it's not final closure, because the closure really comes with accountability and consequences. I mean, I live in England, and I see what's happening. I'm a sports fan, and I see what's happening with the Premier League and the golf thing in Saudi Arabia, and people are calling this sports washing, and they're saying, why can't, the Saudi government come clean if there is a role or if there is not a role? The 9/11 families want to know, how much does the U.S. know about, the Saudi involvement, whether there was any or whether there was none?
On balance, just quickly, would you say that Al-Qaeda is stronger now than it was 22 years ago?
Well, they assassinated one of the leaders a while ago. I think there are rival groups, so to speak. You've got Islamic State, and that's the turf war that's going on right now, for example. But again, going to America real quickly, the perception threat has changed. It's no longer the threat externally, Donald Trump with his Muslim ban. It's the rise of right-wing extremism, where they've now doubled their investigations.
OK, all right. Thank you so much. Really, really interesting. Carl Bostic there. Don't go anywhere. We have got a lot more to come.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, my name's Rachel Ayres and welcome to your latest GB News weather forecast brought to you by the Met Office. So it was a hot weekend, but what does it look like as we go into the new week? Well, there is plenty of brightness across much of England and Wales to start this morning, with any mist, fog and low cloud lifting and breaking. But we are seeing an increase in cloud and outbreaks of rain sinking southeastwards throughout this morning. We might also see the odd heavier shower and thunderstorm developing as we go into this afternoon. Still feeling pleasant in any sunny spells, but those temperatures a fair bit down on what we saw at the weekend, with highs of 27 in the southeast. Now, as we go into this evening, this cloud and rain will continue to make its way southeastwards, becoming heavy in places but also slow moving as it goes into England and Wales. Clearing skies though across Scotland, Northern Ireland and later on across Northern England. So a chilly night to come here, though still humid and remaining warm further south. So as we go into the start of Tuesday, a fairly foggy, humid and murky start to the day for much of England and Wales, with outbreaks of rain spreading southeastwards throughout the day. Plenty of sunshine though for Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, but starting to feel a fair bit cooler here with those winds coming from a northerly direction. Still just clinging on to some of that warmth there across the southeast, with highs still getting into the low to mid-20s.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Up next, more on the growing pressure on the government to take stronger action against Beijing after the unmasking, well, not quite unmasking yet, of a spy in the middle of Parliament. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
10 a.m. on Monday, the 11th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Bev Turner and Andrew Pierce.
Spy showdown. Rishi Sunak facing calls to designate China as a national security threat as there is a spy in the heart of the British government. How many more could there be?
Is it time to ban the bully? Home Secretary Suella Braverman says she's seeking urgent advice on banning American bully XL dogs after an attack in Birmingham went viral this weekend. You can see these very distressing images on your screen now.
And prison chaos. An inmate stabbed at Wandsworth days after terror suspect Daniel Kalivas escaped. Is our prison service losing control? We'll bring you the latest.
And our pensions in peril. Rishi Sunak refuses to commit to triple lock on pensions being in the Tory election manifesto.
There'll be a lot of pressure on him to do it because we know the people who tend to vote Conservative in general elections are people over the age of 55, 60. They've paid taxes all their life. So why shouldn't pensions keep pace with benefits?
Absolutely.
That's the argument.
Yeah. Let us know your thoughts this morning. GB Views at gbnews.com. As always, first though, here's Ray Addison in the GB Newsroom.
Thanks both. Good morning. 1 minute past 10, our top stories this hour. Terror suspect Daniel Khalif has arrived at Westminster Magistrates Court to face charges of escaping from Wandsworth Prison. The 21-year-old former soldier was arrested in West London on Saturday morning after a 4-day manhunt. He'd last been seen walking away from a bid-food van near Wandsworth roundabout. Khalif had been on remand after being charged with terror offences in January. UK authorities have told GB News they are currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. GB News understands the majority relate to lone individuals, but there are also more organised plots and threats from state actors. It comes 22 years after the 9/11 terror attack, in which more than 2,750 people were killed. Chris Phillips is former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. He told us the threat of terror is still present, but large attacks are unlikely.
The UK has faced terrorism in one form or another for 100 years, and that's not likely to go away. The sad fact is that MI5 have so many things on their plate. Not only have they got the threat of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and individuals within that, hundreds, thousands actually of people in the country that are of concern. But also they've got Northern Ireland, also they've got, you've been talking about the Chinese spies, that falls to them as well. All these things are a real threat to society.
The Prime Minister is facing calls to designate China as a national security threat. Comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for Beijing. According to The Times, the Home Secretary is urging Rishi Sunak to relabel the country as a risk to Britain's safety and interests. Mr Sunak says he confronted the Chinese Premier at the G20 summit over, quote, unacceptable interference in democracy. Robert Courts is a member of the Defence Select Committee. He says the threat of espionage is present.
There's always a concern, of course, whenever you hear a story like this. I mean, you have to be aware that at any time espionage is going on. That's a point of public life. I mean, whatever position you occupy, people will always be trying to find out secrets and to understand things. It is clearly very shocking to see one that is at the heart of British public life and right at the heart of our democracy. But we just need to be aware of these things and that they're there. I mean, one of the things that 9/11 did was, because of the massive focus on organised terror, on groups like Al-Qaeda, it's become much harder for them to operate.
British search and rescue teams have been deployed to Morocco following the deadly earthquake which struck on Friday. The Foreign Office said 60 specialists are in the North African country, along with 4 search dogs and rescue equipment. They arrived on 2 Royal Air Force aircraft. More than 2,100 people have died as a result of the 6.8 magnitude quake, and almost 2,500 were injured. With many areas still difficult to reach, it's feared the number of casualties will still climb. A last-ditch attempt at a bailout by HMV to rescue retailer Wilko has failed, throwing thousands of jobs into doubt. Administrators for the high street chain had been in discussions over a deal to buy around 200 Wilko stores. However, talks have now collapsed. Wilko, which employed around 12,500 staff, had previously announced a £13 million deal to sell 51 shops to B&M, though it has made no promise to take on Wilko workers. Administrators have already announced more than 1,600 redundancies at Wilko in recent weeks. The Conservative Party is being accused of having broken Britain by the Trades Union Congress. Speaking in Liverpool, General Secretary Paul Nowak will claim that nothing works in this country anymore and no one in government cares. He'll also accuse the Tories of failing to protect our schools and run a functioning NHS. It comes as the TUC reported the government to the United Nations Workers' Rights Watchdog over the new minimum service levels law. Dan Jarvis, Shadow Security Minister, says Labour will repeal the legislation if it comes to power.
We have never supported these proposals. We think that they were deeply flawed. They're not supported by a very significant number of employers around the country. I think the Transport Secretary, the Education Secretary conceded at one stage that these were not effective proposals that were being brought forward. The TUC provides a good forum to have a meaningful conversation with the trade unions about how we can work collaboratively together to invest in our workforce and make sure that we are best placed to achieve economic success.
And finally, Luis Rubiales has resigned as president of the Spanish Football Federation. Comes after he kissed Jenny Hermoso on the lips following the World Cup final. Hermoso said the kiss was not consensual and submitted a complaint to Spain's High Court. Rubiales has tweeted that he will defend his innocence. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying, play GB News. Now let's get back to Andrew and Bev.
Very good morning. Thank you for joining us. So it's been announced that the TUC is reporting the government to the United Nations Workers' Rights Watchdog over the controversial new law on strikes.
Oh, please. The General Secretary, Paul, honestly, the United Nations, can we not manage our own affairs?
So they're basically telling on us.
Oh,
they're going to the United Nations.
Can't believe it. The General Secretary, Paul, know that, said the union body will be lodging the case at the International Labour Organisation because the legislation on ensuring minimum levels of service during industrial action falls far short of international legal standards, even though it's in place in places like Germany and France.
Our Deputy Political Editor joins us with more on this now. Tom, so we're being dobbed in, basically, to the United Nations.
Pathetic.
Because we don't look after our workers correctly. Is that right? That's what General Secretary Paul Nowak is saying.
That's the big eye-catching bit of the speech of Paul Nowak, which is going to take place in around an hour's time here in Liverpool. But I have to say, it does seem like it is a bit of a stunt. Of course, the UN can't compel countries to do one thing or another. It's an intergovernmental body, not a supranational one, if we want to get technical about it. It's not like the EU. It can't strike down UK laws. And so this would be a bit of a rap on the knuckles if it did get that far. But as you rightly say in your introduction, there are other countries in Europe that do deliver minimum service level requirements for when strikes take place. And actually, in many ways, the law that the government has proposed has been criticised by some on the more free market right for not going as far as it could. But the government wanted to make sure that it could get it through the House of Lords, so has kept it very much in line with what goes on in countries like Spain or Germany or France. And so really this does seem like a bit of a red herring, but there are some big substantive things happening today, of course. The trade union movement will be trying to show itself as much more united than it has perhaps appeared in recent history. Of course, we have seen some of those trade unions be very critical of the Labour Party, of the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer. Indeed, particularly the new leader of Unite has been criticising the Labour leadership as being a bit of a 90s tribute act. We'll have to see how this private dinner tonight with Sir Keir Starmer and the leaders of all the trade unions here will go down. Perhaps it might be a bit of a frosty affair, but of course the crescendo may well come tomorrow when the deputy leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, will address the trade unionists here. And I suppose we'll have to see whether or not that sort of unity that was very, very clear under the previous Labour Party leadership, the closeness between Jeremy Corbyn's leadership and the trade union movement, that has slightly drifted in recent years. We'll have to see if that drift will continue, or indeed if some healing can go on over the next couple of days.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Tom Harwood there at the TUC conference. You used to cover the TUC conference. Is it a riot?
No. It was often a riot when I arrived because I was never
you were dead popular.
But of course, there was a time when the TUC were hugely important, when they were involved in big government decisions. That will change, of course, when we get a Labour government, because they won't be writing cheques for millions of pounds to bankroll the Labour Party unless they're going to get some input into policy. And although at the moment they're at war with Keir Starmer, it'll be interesting after the election. So perhaps I'll be going back to the TUC comments. But can I just say, TUC, ridiculous reporting us to the United Nations, some stupid committee. As Tom pointed out, it's got no power. This law, the same law which is designed to have certain minimum levels of voters, a number of votes, forced strikes in places like Trarel strikes in the NHS. Those laws are in place in Germany and France, for God's sake. What's wrong with them?
Absolutely.
They're popular.
We've got a few big stories this morning. Want to know your thoughts on this banning these XL bully dogs?
There's
another attack in Birmingham at the weekend, Saturday. One 11-year-old girl was bitten. It's just awful, awful. Let us know your thoughts on that. We'll look at the footage. We should warn you, really, because this is really distressing footage. This is if you're listening on the radio, it's on a garage forecourt. There's a man who's literally wrestled to the ground by this dog. Somebody comes along with what appears to be a big stick or a broom.
It's a shovel.
It's a shovel. Hits the dog with the shovel. The dog doesn't even make makes no difference.
Pulls him down again.
Poor man is literally pursued and chased by this dog. I can't think of anything more terrifying than this.
And you imagine the impact that would have on a
nightmare.
child, because the dog grabbed him by the back. We don't know what state he's in, but we know that 3 children have been killed by these monsters. 11 lives. Fatalities have been associated with these dogs in 2 years. Who wants those sort of dogs as pets?
Idiots. You have to be an idiot to want to own a dog like that with the potential to cause such harm and to kill people. You wouldn't be allowed to walk around the street with a knife or a gun. Why are we allowing people to take these dogs onto streets?
And we are a nation of dog lovers, and how many dogs are these dogs killing? 1
dog a day in July. Those dogs, these bully XLs, they killed 1 other dog a day in this country alone in the whole month of July.
It's perhaps an older person and maybe a pensioner. Their whole life is the dog, their companion, and it's savaged to death in front of them by one of these vile dogs. People say to me, oh, no, it's not the dogs, it's the owners. Sorry.
Not in this case.
These dogs are monsters.
They are monsters.
They're beasts. But I do say about the owners who've got them, why would you want them?
Awful. When we were on air on Thursday, of course, we had our Daniel Khalif, the terror suspect, was still
he was
on the run. I had a bit of a busy time.
Hours.
Busy time on Saturday.
Go on, do tell.
I was on GBNews on Saturday because I got up Saturday morning. Wasn't it a wonderful weather this weekend?
I was swimming in the ocean.
Heavenly. And so I got up to go out and get some fresh air and a little bit of a run, and saw a police car, just an unmarked police car, but they were chatting on their walkie-talkies and their phones and stuff, and had the window down, and I said, oh, we're looking for him. And she said, have you seen him? And I said, no, not yet, but we're looking. She said, he was literally here 5 minutes ago. And then she said, if you see him, ring 999. This was the next street to where I live in West London. She said, he was literally here 5 minutes ago. Black T-shirt, black da-da-da. If you see him, ring 999. She said, the calls at the moment, it's taking ages to get through on 999, but ring. And then they put the lights on the unmarked car and went off over the pavement to get him. And then about an hour later, they did.
You didn't know she was Miss Marple, did you?
Do you know what? I did get
the Miss Marple of GB News.
I did go looking. I thought we were going to get an exclusive here. I would have approached him if I'd seen him.
And look, the prison service got a kicking, in my view, rightly, because this bloke should never have been in. He should have stayed in the high security Belmarsh prison, but they got him within 75 hours.
He's obviously a bit of a wally, though, isn't he?
Yeah.
I don't think he's a criminal mastermind, to be honest. He slept under Kew Bridge for 2 days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
and when he was pulled off his bike by a plainclothes copper, he says, "It's not me. I've done nothing." Right. He's in court this morning.
I like the comment from one of the people he was at school with, who was interviewed by the BBC, and this guy who was at school with him said, what, Danny Khalif? He didn't know his proverbial from his elbow, said, which I thought was quite interesting. But anyway, he's in court this morning, so we'll let you know how that goes. Right, still to come, BMW is set to announce plans to build its next generation electric Mini in Oxford, where GB News, Britain's news channel.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. A series of fronts are pushing their way southeastwards across the UK today. Ahead of these, there will be the risk of some showers, potentially thundery too, and whilst it is turning cooler, there's still some hot air across parts of the southeast ahead of the fronts that are making their way in from the northwest. And behind the fronts will be something a little bit cooler. Also quite a bit of rain on those fronts too, so a fairly wet picture across many northern northwestern parts of the UK. Staying a little bit drier further south, but potential for a few showers to kick off in and these could perhaps turn thundery. In the southeast, where we're still in that hot air, temperatures are likely to get into the high 20s, so not quite as hot as it has been recently, but still fairly hot for the time of year. Elsewhere, starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, a bit cooler as the air comes in behind those fronts. Through this evening and overnight, further rain making its way southeastwards across many parts of England and into Wales, but in the southeast, staying ahead of that front, and here we could see some heavy, perhaps even thundery showers pushing in from near France. Temperatures not dropping particularly low across many southern parts, staying in the high teens for some, but cooler, more comfortable sleeping across more northern areas here. As we go through Tuesday, this front then is gradually going to push its way southeastwards. I emphasise gradually because in the southeast we'll stay ahead of it through much of the day, and the potential still for some heavy thundery downpours here. Further north and west though, some bright sunny spells, but turning more comfortable, cooler than it has been through some recent days. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But
and action.
Read my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:20. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
Now, we are going to look at some of your emails first of all. Jeff has said, make all dogs in public require a muzzle. That way, there are no loopholes or confusions. Even little Jack Russell can cause life-changing injuries to a small child.
Yeah, and we're talking about China and the terrorism. Dave says we need to recall President Biden's rapid withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Taliban were cozying up to China prior to withdrawal.
And on the pensions, as Andrew was saying, Rishi Sunak has to be very careful to do anything which might upset pensioners. On the triple lock, Dave said it would be the biggest mistake of his career if he does that to us pensioners. Why should we have to sell our houses when we've got a country full of work-shy parasites claiming benefits?
I did a video for the Daily Mail making that point only last week.
Yeah.
Dave, you should have a look at it.
And actually, Ted has said, I sincerely hope the lessons have been learned and that Burko is at least censured, investigated and charged for jeopardising parliamentary security by giving someone an important job that they are not trained or qualified to do. Was that his intention, to jeopardise our governmental security? I doubt it, but
no,
that was an interesting revelation, wasn't it?
By Piers Possenger, but it was classic John Burko, put people in jobs because he wants people from different backgrounds, working class backgrounds, black and ethnic backgrounds, great, but make sure they can do the job.
Yeah.
And the Sergeant-at-Arms has always been steeped in military. The Sergeant-at-Arms, was it in Canada, Australia, actually shot dead a terrorist who was rampaging around the building. That was only a few years ago.
Yeah, I remember
Pulled
that.
his gun, do you remember?
Yeah, I do remember.
That was their very own sergeant. It was either Canada or Australia.
Yeah.
It was Australia.
Right, let us know your thoughts. Get in touch this morning, gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, BMW is set to announce plans to build its next-generation electric Mini in Oxford after securing a multi-million-pound government funding package.
The German car maker will transform its existing plant. This will secure around 4,000 skilled jobs, a huge boost to the UK's car industry post-Brexit. Remember they all said car industry would be screwed by Brexit?
Is that the word they used?
I don't think they used that word, but you know what I mean.
Well, joining us in the studio now is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Just explain this to us with a new venture like this. So the government are also investing in this.
Yeah.
Do we see any of the profits as a taxpayer?
We won't see any profits, but there'll be lots of extra growth, extra tax revenue, extra high-quality jobs, at least. You know, that's the way the government plays these things. International car makers are past masters at going round the world with their hands out, threatening to, we'll build it here, we'll build it there. And pretty much every major Western country does this, the UK to a lesser extent. But let's go through some of the details. Because I agree with you, Andrew, this is a really good day for the UK car industry.
Yeah.
We're now producing around 800,000 cars a year, many of them for exports. Not as many as the 1.3, 1.4 million before the pandemic, but we are getting back there.
Yeah.
So let's have a look at this BMW Boost. Of course, you've got the famous Cowley factory in Oxford. The new EV, the new generation EV Mini is to be built in Oxford. The ministers are saying, I've put this in quotes, it secures 4,000 high-quality jobs. Some of them are skilled jobs. And, of course, in manufacturing, jobs tend to pay a lot more than average wages. BMW says it's investing 600 million quid, mainly in Oxford, but also in Swindon.
My hometown.
I know that's close to your heart,
my dad,
Andrew. Didn't your dad work in the Swindon factory?
He was British Leyland, which became Rover, and he went through all the many forms of British Leyland.
No
wonder
you turned out the way you did, all those trade union stuff.
Yeah.
And the government, it's not confirming this, but it's pretty clear it's put in around 75 million pounds. So some serious money there.
Could they have done that, Liam, in the under the EU rules, all those strict rules on state aid, because you're not allowed to give state aid because that gives you a competitive advantage over another EU country, even though we know the French did it all the time. Would we have done it?
Well, here's the thing, Andrew. You had those EU rules, and you know, us Brits, we're sticklers for a rule, aren't we? We always queue up politely and all the rest of it. We always stuck to the rules.
We did.
Whereas almost all the other large economies were gaming the rules and finding ways to get around them. And, of course, if a rule break went to the Commission or to the European Court of Justice or whatever it was, that was basically a political court. So we can do this now freely without breaking any EU rules, of course. And it strikes me that there's been a number of interesting developments in the car-making industry. We had the announcement of Tata from India making committed to build a gigafactory down in Somerset. I was in Ellesmere Port at the end of last week, of course. Stellantis, which makes Citroën and Fiat and Jeep and Dodge. They're going to be making EVs down up there in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire. That's a major development. The first ever EV-only factory here in the UK, and Stellantis' first EV factory anywhere, and they manufacture in over 30 countries. Look, we've had lots of discussions about whether or not EVs are the right way to go.
You read my mind.
But my Telegraph column, not this weekend, the weekend before, it was all about questioning, is this really the way forward? For now, it seems to be the only game in town, so better that EV investment is happening to some degree in the UK rather than us missing out.
See, this is my thought on it, Liam, is that if electric vehicles suddenly... I think within a very short period of time, I think within 10 to 20 years, we're going to know whether these are going to last or not.
Sooner.
Do you think?
Yeah.
So it might be 5 to 10 years. My fear is the EV industry bubble will burst because people don't want to buy them. They don't retain their value. Everyone gets range anxiety. You can't charge them anywhere. They're not fit for purpose in some ways. And so what if this whole project runs out of steam and we realise, actually, we quite liked our diesel engine?
Let me answer, but we're going to talk about Wilco as well in a minute.
Sure.
But let me answer that, Bev, and I've thought about this a lot. Look, when we built the canals in the UK, they took an awful lot of effort to build, and they were pretty soon superseded by the railways, right? But and I'm not supporting EVs. Look, I have major doubts about the technology, the efficiency of driving around with a half-ton battery in your car, the lithium, the cobalt, the manganese, the copper, all these rare earths and other soft commodities that you need to make them. We don't have those to the extent that we need to. They're in China, they're in Central Africa, they're in Chile, they're hard to access. Then there's the rollout of the charging mechanisms. And it's because people, Bev, have... who really know lots about this, have the doubts that you and I have, that you can't get money to build that gigafactory up in the northeast, even though there was matching funding there. So I do have concerns about it. But even when the canals were... even the very building of the canals, right, in Britain during the Industrial Revolution, even though they turned out to be superseded by the railways and now they're just for pleasure craft mainly, the very building of them generated growth and employment and wealth and other industries.
But mentioning the canals, it's not just nostalgia. Why don't we use them more? Why not?
No,
they're there.
Because in the end, they're slower because, you know, a little putt-putt engine or a horse by the taper. Sometimes they are actually used for transport.
But also, I look at the River
Let's talk about Wilco.
No, hang on. I look at the River Thames and nothing's happening on it.
I agree.
We go to the River Seine and the Danube and they're packed. Why don't we do it?
I agree. We could use river freight more. We do use some, but it's just not as economically viable as rail freight.
Let's talk Wilco.
Look, Wilco. We've been covering this for a long time. 400 stores, a real staple of the high street, particularly in the north and the Midlands. 12,000 employees. It put in for administration in the middle of August. Since then, there's just been a bun fight. Who's going to buy it? How much are they going to buy? Now, look, Wilco has some really valuable sites on really good high streets, and some of those are going to be snapped up. Some of them aren't going to be snapped up. We know that the discounter B&M are going to buy 50 stores out the 400. They've committed to that. We know that the likes of Pepco, that owns Poundland, The Range, another online, they're looking to buy some of Wilco's assets. The big blow this morning is that the owner of HMV, David Putnam, he was going to buy, or he's looking to buy, between 150 and 200 stores. That deal has now collapsed.
Why?
Right? Because maybe he can't get the deal that he wants. Maybe the administrator wouldn't let him only cherry-pick the good stores rather than the bad. This is still... Look, there are some redundancies now in the sort of central nervous system of Wilco. It's not going to be bought as a whole-going concern, so their own warehousing, their own logistics is going to be broken up because whoever buys them will have their own versions of that. But a little chink of good news here, and I really feel for a lot of the people who work for Wilco. A lot of them are women, little part-time jobs.
People who work for them,
the kind of money that just the extras that for families that make life bearable when they're just about managing. That's the kind of employer this is. That's the demographic. This is why we're covering it to the extent that we are. This is a GB News story, the collapse of Wilco and the High Street. But look, Aldi have just come out, right? Aldi, massive German retailer, of course. They've got 990 stores around the UK now. Unbelievable how they've expanded.
How quick that's happened.
Aldi are now saying that they want to build another 550 stores in Britain.
Good.
Another 20,000 jobs, right?
Great.
That announcement is coming out now, just as Wilco is collapsing. I mean, there's something could happen there.
Yeah, yeah.
All these amazing sites.
Yeah.
Some of them won't be suitable for Aldi, but some of them may be. Or if not, some of the employees of Wilko may be suitable for new Aldis.
And generally, do Aldi develop on a high street, or are they out of town?
That's the
Well,
thing.
they need car parking, don't
That's
they?
it. Some Wilkos are on the edge of town. Some of the older Wilkos, obviously, are in the middle of town. But you know, you get little Tesco local, don't you? You get Sainsbury's local.
Yeah, yeah.
Aldi might say, well, let's do a bit of that.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's still to play for.
Okay.
Any administration negotiation, it's always a sort of, you know, it's poker face Russian roulette to the
All
very
right.
end.
Thank you, Liam. We've got some breaking news, apparently. The Speaker of the House of Commons, the Right Honourable Sir Lindsay Hoyle MP, will make a brief statement in the Chamber at 2:30 this afternoon in relation to weekend media reports relating to allegations of spying.
And in more breaking news in the last few minutes, Daniel Khalif has appeared in court charged with escaping from prison. We're going to go to our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, morning.
Good morning. Yes, Daniel Khalif has now been remanded back into custody. He'll appear again at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on the 29th of September. He arrived here at just about 9:45 this morning in an armoured police van, accompanied by two unmarked police vehicles for that brief court appearance. It was only about 15 minutes or so. In the dock, he was wearing a prison-issue grey tracksuit, flanked by two uniformed police officers and also a prison officer. He spoke to confirm his name and his date of birth, and then some details of the charges were read out. The charge that he escaped from prison last Wednesday underneath the food delivery van that had arrived at Wandsworth Prison, using strapping, the court heard. Now, that strapping, they said, may have been made from bed sheets. No more detail than that. But he was remanded, as I say, back into custody. No plea at this stage for that Crown Court hearing. There was no application for bail, and he will be leaving here, Westminster Magistrates Court, soon to begin that journey to, I can assure you, it won't be Wandsworth Prison again, but an undisclosed prison at this stage.
Thank you, Mark. Mark White there as Daniel Khalif is charged. And obviously a huge amount of money being spent by the police and the helicopters, everything that was looking for him at the weekend.
Got him pretty quickly, though.
They did get him very quickly, yeah, well done.
Down to Miss Marple here.
It wasn't.
She was on the case. She was. There she was.
Right, okay.
Driving round. What are we going to do if you caught him?
I was going to say, get in the car, you're an idiot.
He'd have done
I'll
it,
go make
obviously.
you a cup of tea.
Yeah.
Right, up next, is it time to ban the American XL bully dogs? Our Home Secretary thinks so. Now, though, your headlines with Ray Addison.
Good morning. 10:33, our top stories this hour. Well, as we've been hearing, a terror suspect who escaped from Wandsworth Prison last week has been remanded in custody after appearing in court. "21-year-old former soldier Daniel Khalif was arrested in West London on Saturday morning after a 4-day manhunt. He'd last been seen walking away from a Bidfood van near Wandsworth roundabout. Khalif escaped while awaiting trial after being charged with terror offences in January. UK authorities have told GB News they are currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. It's understood the majority relate to lone individuals, but there are also more organised plots and threats from state actors. It comes 22 years after the 9/11 terror attack in which more than 2,750 people were killed. British search and rescue teams have been deployed to Morocco following the deadly earthquake which struck on Friday. The Foreign Office says 60 specialists are in the North African country, along with search dogs and rescue equipment. More than 2,100 people have died as a result of the 6.8 magnitude quake. A last-ditch attempt at a bailout by HMV to rescue retailer Wilko has failed, throwing thousands of jobs into doubt. Administrators for the high street chain had been in discussions over a deal to buy around 200 stores. However, talks have now collapsed. Wilko, which employed around 12,500 staff, had previously announced a £13 million deal with B&M. There's more on all of those stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Let's take a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2519 and 1.1672 euros. Price of gold, £1,540 and 21 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,494 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Up next, we'll be debating, is it time to ban those horrific American XL bully dogs? Our Home Secretary thinks so. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nah, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It is 10:40. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So should we ban American Bully XL dogs? We're joined by our lovely guest this morning, Daily Mail columnist Sarah Vine and political commentator Bushra Sheikh, to discuss this more. This footage, Sarah, this weekend was so horrific of one of these attacks that it just really brings home, doesn't it, that how vile these animals are.
They're very, very big and strong dogs, and they're bred for this purpose. I mean, I think that there needs to be a slightly longer-term strategy on these sorts of dogs. I've always been an advocate of dog licences. I think we should bring them back. I think they make people think twice about getting a dog.
So
in the
every
first
dog
place.
should have a licence.
And I think the licence should be predicated on doing a proper, you know, dog handling course, so that if you're going to get a dog, that you know how to... I mean, all dogs need to be trained.
Yeah,
Even
they do.
nice, little, sweet little dogs need to be trained, because at the best, they're a nuisance, and at the worst, they can be quite harmful for other dogs as well, not just humans. The problem with these XL bullies is they're bred for specific purposes. They're used primarily by people as status dogs. So they're used by people who don't really want the dog because they want a nice pet. They just want to wander around the streets
and
looking
look tough.
hard,
Yeah.
and everyone going, oh my God, you're such a man, you've got this really scary dog. And of course, they don't know how to handle them.
No.
They haven't trained them. They've probably just got them as puppies and just kept them in a house and not done anything sensible with them. And, you know, I think if the government is going to round up every XL bully and put it down, that is going to be quite problematic for them, because there will be some dogs that haven't actually attacked anyone.
Not yet.
And there might be some bullies that are perfectly well trained and under control. I don't know. But the idea that that the dog is to blame, yes, they are. That is a particularly tough
is it
breed,
the owner's fault?
But I think the owners need to take responsibility as well. And I think also we just need to be a little bit more realistic about the fact that, you know, humans are breeding these dogs. What we need to do is to make the breeding of these dogs something that people will not do, because they've been bred for specific reasons.
Yeah, I mean, the size of them.
Yeah.
And the way that your man was brought down twice by the dog.
Yeah, I mean, by
was
the way,
being hit by a shovel and he didn't stop
if the dog comes at you
them.
like that, the worst thing you can do is run away.
Yeah.
Because then it thinks that you're vulnerable. The best thing you can do is to just scream at it. It's like if you get attacked by a bear. You know, they always say if you get attacked by a bear, you should roar at it.
Yeah.
You should just rise up and because then you need to dominate the animal.
But it's easier said than done, isn't it?
Of course it's easier said than done.
Because your reaction, Bush, will probably is get the hell out of
It is run away.
It is. Look, I very rarely agree with Braverman, but I will echo exactly what she's saying. These are very frightening dogs. And just to give you a stat, the figures of attacks on young children since 2022 has doubled. We're about 9,900 attacks NHS have recorded from dogs generally and the bully dogs. So for me, these are very frightening, and I'd probably say ban them. I don't think there is a solution with them.
No.
They're very scary.
Where did they come from? I mean, how new are they?
Well, they're bred. No, they're bred. They're being bred by individuals for a specific market. They are very much bought as status dogs.
And I think you're right, Sarah. This isn't about the dog. This is about the owners and what they're keeping them as pets for. Usually, people want pets and they're loving and they want to have them in a family environment. These are particularly bred for fighting.
I mean, I grew up in Italy where people used to keep dogs as guard dogs, and they would deliberately train them to be attack dogs, particularly Alsatians, dogs like that. And I was attacked by an Alsatian when I was a child, and it bit me quite badly on the arm. And it was just, you know, people keep Alsatians. They're lovely dogs. They're very trainable. Except, you know, the point is that if you train a dog, if you buy a dog for a specific person, Akitas are similar. They're very big, aggressive, hard to control dogs. You know, you need to be a really skilled handler to have one of these dogs. And I think most of the people who buy them don't. They just want them because they want to swagger around thinking that they're, you know, very
Is your dog well behaved?
Muffin is exemplary.
Muffin doesn't sound like he's going to rip your leg off.
Muffin is I mean, you know, you try to take away her food, she will growl at you.
Right.
But she's not... no, she's very well behaved and she's trained.
Did you take her to training?
I've done training with her. Yeah, absolutely. I've had 4 dogs, sorry. And I've always done a training. I've always taken them to training, to puppy school, just to kind of... you know, because otherwise they're a nightmare. Apart from anything else, as an owner, they're a nightmare because you can't have a dog... I mean, like Bushra was saying, a lot of these attacks are not out on the street. They're attacks in the home, and you know, dogs can get very jealous. They can develop all sorts of issues. You need to understand that getting a dog is not like getting a hamster. It's a really, they are quite complex animals.
And a lot of people bought them in lockdowns, of course. There was a huge increase.
I mean, I'm on the board of a dogs, trust thing, a charity thing, and you know, the amount of animals that we get that are there because the owners just don't understand how to look after them.
Very sad.
Right, should we have a look at the coverage of the last night of the proms and why it's caused such controversy? Because there was an organisation outside of the event handing out blue EU flags, Bushra. There we go.
Look at them.
There we go.
Drive you nuts.
Aren't they?
Drive you nuts.
Causing trouble.
Causing that trouble. Probably some of those people taking those flags, I mean, what they are.
No.
Yeah. And so the last night of the proms, the footage was lots of people waving an EU flag. There they go, whilst everybody's singing Rule Britannia. What do you make of that, Bushra?
Yeah, it's quite odd, isn't it? I think, is this just a customary thing that they're doing with these flags and giving them out? But does it really resonate with Great Britain? It hasn't really got anything to kind of do with that. So I'm wondering to myself, why would they do that to begin with? Is this
to
just
infuriate people like me who were watching it?
Yeah,
and it infuriated me.
It's just to put your blood pressure up.
My blood pressure went up. In the end, because I never tweet late at night, I tweet saying, oh, for God's sake, this is the proms, let's make it. But it also, what didn't help was the very irritating American conductor then made a long speech where she was even banging on about the United Nations and diversity.
I mean, I think just ignore them. They're like naughty children.
Yeah, that's the right thing.
Just ignore them. That's my view.
You can't deny it's superb guerrilla marketing, though,
Yeah,
isn't
but just ignore them. They're like naughty children. They're just trying to be naughty.
And there was a sea of them waving them. So as we're building up to Land of Hope and Glory, they were... I mean, my partner had to walk out the room. So cross.
Then they achieved their aim, didn't they?
Yeah, so cross. He was so cross.
Education, right, kids have just gone back to school. Many parents now feel that it is not fit for purpose, and this one particular school, Bedales, it's a very expensive private school, Bushra, charges £42,000 a year. The head has come out. Finally, somebody had to say it, that the education curriculum and GCSEs are no longer fit for purpose.
Hear, hear. I've been saying this for so long, I feel like we haven't kind of moved with the education system into the future and what that looks like. And when you speak to students, they're also saying the same thing. It's so outdated. We need to really figure out a new way forward. And I believe that private schools should further move away from these outdated GCSEs, which are totally right. These are the things that we did in the 80s, you know, in the 90s. And I seriously think there needs to be an overhaul.
Why are they outdated? I don't understand. Why are they outdated?
I think the idea is, I mean, for me, well, the head has said, looking at the education landscape, it's not fit for the future, not fit for purpose. GCSEs are outdated.
Why? Because you do English, maths, history.
I think it's to do with the fact, what I observe with having young teenagers is the fact that they are being taught to take in information, retain it, remember it, regurgitate it. And in a world of Google and fact-finding, it's not a skill they need to develop in the way that we used to buy a book and have to retain the information.
Being able to do an exam... I mean, I'm a journalist. I write columns for the newspaper, as does Andrew. It's like every day doing an exam. And it's a really important skill, being able to marshal your thoughts within a limited time frame and get them onto a page. It's not just about... It's not a useless skill. It's really not a useless skill. And I would say that, you know, my son has just done his A-levels. He did a couple of GCSEs early, but he didn't do the GCSEs because... of COVID. And so it was really hard for him nailing the exam technique. And actually, it was a really good process, him learning to do that, because it's a skill that you do need. Being able to produce information, being able to perform under pressure is something that we all have to do in our lives, not just professionally, just generally. And that's part of what this is about. And I agree, you can, you know, it's like this other woman today saying, oh, children should use AI in their exams.
Oh, did she?
I mean, at some point... we do have to be a bit careful about just turning our brains off and just letting those things take over.
I totally agree, but it's a very narrow measure of a person's skill set.
Absolutely, and I think what we need to do is find a balance, because whilst I totally agree with you as well, Sarah, I think that's a very, very good skill to have. I think these days kids need to sort of use their imaginations more. They're more inventive as well, and the exams and the GCSEs don't do that. These are exams that are designed literally where you're spoon-fed in school and you just regurgitate this information. There is no space for them to kind of introduce themselves.
So they're saying get rid of the exam altogether and replace it with...
They're just saying to kind of update it and have the exams. Let's move away from the way that the GCSE exam.
I think there's
Let's change the format.
There's an argument for saying that I think that children have to choose their subjects far too early.
Yeah.
I prefer the baccalaureate system where you sort of study everything up until the age of 18, and so you have a much broader base of knowledge. And what you do what they do is you start your sort of secondary school and you go and you but you carry on doing maths until the end. You carry on doing all these subjects. You don't narrow yourself down at the age of 16 to 3 subjects, which is quite difficult, actually, for most people.
The problem is, I think, because we have this exam system particularly, and isn't there some amazing statistic about the number of people who are in prisons who are illiterate, who can't literally read and write, but the majority of people in prisons. This GCSE system of focusing primarily on reading, writing, learning, it means that the kids who find it hard leave school with no competence.
But that's why you must test them at every stage. That's why you need to have these checks in primary school, so that you can identify a child that's falling behind. If you don't have any, if you don't do, people are always saying, let's get rid of SATs. Fine, but how are you going to know whether your child can actually read or write? Unfortunately, these tests are good. They are a good way of establishing whether when children are falling behind or not.
Do we test them too much, Sarah?
Well, I think a good school would, does lots of internal testing, and they keep, they're not sort of government tests, they're not sort of public exams, but they will do regular testing. So, like my son's school, Home Park, they used to do that. They used to just do a test every sort of couple of weeks just to make sure that they'd sort of, they were sort of up to speed. It was very easy for children to fall behind. And I think that's very important internally. The problem with doing everything by assessment is that you're then subject to all sorts of weird things, like if your teacher doesn't like you, or if your teacher likes you too much. These are then it becomes very subjective. The good thing about an exam is that it is just objective.
But then, Sarah, at the same time, would you also agree that this is a combination of factors? Like we don't have enough teachers versus the students in the classroom. So some children that need the additional help are not getting it. And then we've got groups of parents that are not active parenting now when it comes to their children's education. So they're not at home checking what they're doing, where they are. And so the whole responsibility is on the school and not the families. Because I know that many years ago, like my parents were incredibly engrossed in our education. They made sure that, where are you? If you're behind, we can do the extra work at home. Perhaps there is a combination of things happening.
Yeah. Should we just do a little bit on Mickey Mouse degrees as well?
Perfect segue. Perfect
segue. What's this about, Bushra?
So this is regarding, obviously, taxpayers' money. So there are billions of pounds, and obviously the Tory party are leading with this at the moment, and they're saying that Mickey Mouse degrees should not be allowed. And what they're saying is that anybody that gets E's or below should not be allowed to apply for government funding when it comes to Mickey Mouse degrees, so degrees or professions.
E's or below in?
E's, as in the exams, when they come to the A-level stage, if they don't pass with accurate or grades that are kind of sufficient, they shouldn't be entitled to get any kind of support or shouldn't even apply to these degrees.
What do we mean by Mickey Mouse degrees? Because there'll be a lot of people who think, don't say that, that's my grandson's doing that.
Yes,
and
totally.
Golf management is very important. I don't think it should be a degree subject, and I only discovered the other day you can get a degree in events management. Really?
Yes,
Why?
you can.
How come?
The thing is, I would say, is that we used to have a country where people, if they could pass the exams, they could go to university and the government would pay for them to be educated. We now have a system where students have to shackle themselves to thousands of pounds of debt to get any sort of further education, which I personally think is wrong.
I do.
So that's one thing to say. But the other thing to say is that going to university is not just about getting a degree that's going to get you a job.
Whole
It's about learning to be an adult. It's about learning to be independent. It's about learning. Any further education college is the same. And further education, university, whatever you call it, I think everybody should be able to
move on.
go to further education.
Sorry, you can hear the music. We're going to be talking to Nigel Forrest to see what he made of the BBC proms. Don't go anywhere.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. A series of fronts are pushing their way southeastwards across the UK today. Ahead of these, there will be the risk of some showers, potentially thundery too, and whilst it is turning cooler, there's still some hot air across parts of the southeast ahead of the fronts that are making their way in from the northwest. And behind the fronts will be something a little bit cooler. Also, quite a bit of rain on those fronts too, so a fairly wet picture across many northern, northwestern parts of the UK. Staying a little bit drier further south, but potential for a few showers to kick off, and these could perhaps turn thundery. In the southeast, where we're still in that hot air, temperatures are likely to get into the high 20s, so not quite as hot as it has been recently, but still fairly hot for the time of year. Elsewhere, starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, a bit cooler as the air comes in behind those fronts. Through this evening and overnight, further rain making its way southeastwards across many parts of England and into Wales, but in the southeast, staying ahead of that front, and here we could see some heavy, perhaps even thundery showers pushing in from near France. Temperatures not dropping particularly low across many southern parts, staying in the high teens for some, but cooler, more comfortable sleeping across more northern areas here. As we go through Tuesday, this front then is gradually going to push its way southeastwards. I emphasise gradually because in the southeast we'll stay ahead of it through much of the day, and the potential still for some heavy thundery downpours here. Further north and west though, some bright sunny spells, but turning more comfortable, cooler than it has been through some recent days. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Now, Rishi Sunak is being told to take China more seriously as a threat. Nigel Farage gives us his take on that next.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, agreed. My superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Monday, the 11th of September. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So, spy showdown. Rishi Sunak is facing calls to designate China as a national security threat, as there is apparently a spy at the heart of the British government. How many more might there be?
Ban the bully? I think so. Home Secretary Suella Braverman says she's seeking urgent advice on banning the American Bully XL dogs after an attacking Birmingham went viral this weekend.
Prison chaos. An inmate is stabbed at HMP Wandsworth days after terror suspect Daniel Khalifa escaped. From there, is our prison service losing control? Get in touch with us this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com is the email address. First, though, here's your news with Ray Addison.
Good morning. Coming up to 1 minute past 11, our top stories this hour. The parliamentary researcher accused of spying for China says he is completely innocent. The man, who has not been officially named, was arrested in March. Speaking through his lawyers, he says he's spent his career highlighting threats presented by the Chinese Communist Party. Comes as the Prime Minister faced calls to designate China as a national security threat. Robert Courts is a member of the Defence Select Committee. He says the threat of espionage is always present.
There's always a concern, of course, whenever you hear a story like this. I mean, you have to be aware that at any time espionage is going on. That's a point of public life. I mean, whatever position you occupy, people will always be trying to find out secrets and to understand things. It is clearly very shocking to see one that is at the heart of British public life and right at the heart of our democracy. But we just need to be aware of these things and that they're there. I mean, one of the things that 9/11 did was, because of the massive focus on organised terror, on groups like Al-Qaeda, it's become much harder for them to operate.
A terror suspect who escaped from Wandsworth Prison last week has been remanded in custody after appearing in court. 21-year-old Daniel Khalifa was arrested in West London on Saturday after a 4-day manhunt. Westminster Magistrates Court was told the former soldier allegedly escaped by strapping himself to a food delivery vehicle and using material which may have been bedsheets. Khalifa disappeared while awaiting trial after being charged with terror offences in January. UK authorities have told GB News they are currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. It's understood that the majority relate to lone individuals, but there are also more organised plots and threats from state actors. It comes 22 years after the 9/11 terror attack, in which more than 2,750 people were killed. Chris Phillips is former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. He told us the threat of terror is still present, but large attacks are unlikely.
The UK has faced terrorism in one form or another for 100 years, and that's not likely to go away. The sad fact is that MI5 have so many things on their plate. Not only have they got the threat of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and individuals within that, hundreds, thousands actually of people in the country that are of concern, but also they've got Northern Ireland, also they've got, you've been talking about the Chinese spies, that falls to them as well. All these things are a real threat to society.
The Home Secretary is calling on the government to ban American Bully XL dogs, arguing they're a clear and lethal danger, particularly to children. Suella Braverman says she's commissioned urgent advice after an 11-year-old girl was attacked by one in Birmingham. Another American Bully XL dog attacked multiple people, also in Birmingham, over the weekend. However, there are concerns over the feasibility of adding the American bully to the banned breed list. British search and rescue teams have been deployed to Morocco following the deadly earthquake which struck on Friday. The Foreign Office says that 60 specialists are in the North African country, along with 4 search dogs and rescue equipment. They arrived on 2 Royal Air Force aircraft. More than 2,100 people have died as a result of the 6.8 magnitude quake, and almost 2,500 were injured. With many areas still difficult to reach, it's feared the number of casualties will still climb. A last-ditch attempt at a bailout by HMV to rescue retailer Wilko has failed, throwing thousands of jobs into doubt. Administrators for the high street chain had been in discussions over a deal to buy around 200 stores. However, talks have now collapsed. Wilko, which employed around 12,500 staff, had previously announced a £13 million deal with B&M, though it's made no promise to take on Wilko workers. The Conservative Party is being accused of having broken Britain by the Trades Union Congress. Speaking in Liverpool, General Secretary Paul Nowak will claim that nothing works in this country anymore and no one in government cares. It comes as the TUC reported the government to the United Nations Workers' Rights Watchdog over the new minimum service levels law. Dan Jarvis, Shadow Security Minister, says Labour will repeal the legislation if it comes to power.
We have never supported these proposals. We think that they were deeply flawed. They're not supported by a very significant number of employers around the country. I think the Transport Secretary, the Education Secretary conceded at one stage that these were not effective proposals that were being brought forward. The TUC provides a good forum to have a meaningful conversation with the trade unions about how we can work collaboratively together to invest in our workforce and make sure that we are best placed to achieve economic success.
This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now let's get back to Andrew and Bev.
Now, the Speaker of the House of Commons, that's Sir Lindsay Hall, he's going to make a statement later this afternoon after pressure to designate China as a national security threat.
So this comes after a parliamentary researcher was arrested on suspicion of spying for Beijing.
The that spy, so-called spy, has been named by one national newspaper. I suspect now they may be named in the House of Commons. So Nigel Farage, our very own, joins us this morning. Nigel, it's being described as one of the biggest escalations here of a hostile state having a spy right in the heart of Parliament with connections to 2 very, very senior Conservative MPs.
Yeah, the funny thing is we've all forgotten about the Barry Gardner case, haven't we? That was only 18 months ago when a woman closely linked to the Chinese Communist Party had given Barry Gardner's office, not him personally, but his political campaigns and office expenses, hundreds of thousands of pounds. We forget about it, we move on. There's another scandal, we'll probably forget about it and move on. And Andrew, I conclude there are just too many people in senior positions in our country who see long-term their own personal benefit out of our relationship with China. And you only have to look at the list of people who've been non-executive directors of the Huawei Communications Group to understand what I mean.
And was it, was it a mistake, therefore, Nigel, for the Foreign Secretary, bearing in mind that when Rishi Sunak got into number 10, he said there'd be no more rolling out the red carpet to the Chinese? That's what he said. They're the biggest threat to our security and our economy. Was it a mistake for, cleverly, the Foreign Secretary to go to China a couple of weeks ago, effectively laying out the red carpet to the Chinese?
Well, the extraordinary thing is we learned from this story that the arrest took place back in March.
Yeah.
Now, it seems to me to be impossible that the Foreign Secretary didn't know that information.
Right.
And in the light of that, I'm very, very surprised that he went.
I don't know about you, Nigel, but I spend a lot more time being terrified of our own leaders in this country than I do of the Chinese Communist Party. Can I just bring up this tweet from Rishi Sunak when he went to G20 last week? And this is what he actually tweeted, and it says, 2 nations, One ambition, we're just waiting for the graphic to come up, sorry about this, an ambition rooted in our shared values, the connection between our people, and of course, there it is, our passion for cricket. This is with Modi in India. One earth, one family, one future, it says behind the image. Now, this tweet for me raises more questions than it answers. What did you make of it? I'd like an explanation of what that ambition is to start with.
Well, Rishi Sunak is a globalist. I mean, let's be clear. He's said to be a Brexiteer, but that's just because the farming vote, the small farmers, the livestock farmers in North Yorkshire, if he hadn't said he was going to back Brexit, would probably have had him deselected. He's a globalist, and all the evidence is there for all to see. And this shared ambition appears to be not just one of closer relationships between our two countries, but that everything should be done on a grand global scale. And that's why at G7 and G20, Sunak is welcomed with open arms by all of the world's leaders.
Now, they would say, why is that a problem? So why is it a problem to be a globalist? Why does that matter when maybe you could argue that some of our problems need solving with collaboration?
Oh, there's a huge difference, Bev, between collaboration, which is where nations work together on joint issues, and perhaps NATO is a rather good example of how we've done that for the last 70 plus years. A big difference between that and transferring decision-making powers to a higher authority. That is ultimately why we voted Brexit. We wanted to be in control of our own laws and our own borders. And perhaps Rishi Sunak ought to remember that. And, you know, you've got other organisations too, like the World Health Organization, seeking to, you know, give itself powers where it could start to tell us what to do the next time we have a pandemic. Globalism is about taking away the individual voter's right to change their own future. And that's why I find it so repellent.
Yeah.
You mentioned Brexit, Nigel. I don't know if you were watching last night of the proms on Saturday. I watched the last hour. I couldn't bear it. My partner had to leave the room to see quite so many EU flags being waved. And we know it was all a stunt done with the connivance of the BBC, of course, because they were being handed out by an EU organisation beforehand. We then had to put up with a 6-minute speech by the very irritating American conductor who was going on about the United Nations and diversity. It's not the right time or place, is it, for all this EU bile and politics last night of the proms?
No, not at all. In fact, it was blooming rude, I thought, the whole thing. Rude, insulting, inappropriate. But I'm afraid we do have this small group of people in this country who hate the country, hate its flag, hate its history, hate its shared commonality and identity. And there they were in the hall. Mercifully, they are but a small minority. I know they're having a rejoin march in London in a couple of weeks' time. I think the best thing we can do, Andrew, that was difficult on Saturday, I agree. I was rather like you, I had to leave the room. But the best thing we can do, frankly, is to ignore as much as possible.
Yeah.
I think that's probably right. It was just very difficult. Nigel, what of that? I mean, do you detect any... there is this march, rejoin the EU. I get messages all the time from the European movement saying the campaign isn't over. Michael Heseltine is still banging on about it. There are various people in the Labour Party who want it to happen. Is it ever going to happen? Boris Johnson wrote in my paper on Saturday, it will never, ever happen.
No, I don't think Brexit itself legally is going to be reversed. That's not the problem. The problem is, whilst we may be standing taller on the world stage as an independent country, and that's beyond doubt, you know, whether it's the AUKUS deal or whether it's taking leadership over Ukraine or whatever it may be, the problem is domestically, people who voted Brexit are not seeing any of the results they expected. And, you know, one of the reasons that we voted Brexit, we saw what was happening in the Mediterranean. And we said, these people have made such a mess of this, we want nothing to do with it. And yet, we've got our own version of the Mediterranean that's happened. So that's one reason why people are disappointed. And the other, you know, there are millions of people out there, men and women, doing their absolute best to run their little businesses, to act as sole traders. And they genuinely thought that the heavy hand of bureaucracy and taxation would be lighter outside of the EU. And unfortunately, under this government, in nearly all regards, it's become heavier. So there is great disappointment about the execution of Brexit. And I think, for me particularly, and understanding that the Conservative Party never believed in it. I mean, if I hadn't forced them into it in those European elections of 2019, I wonder whether the Damien Greens and others would have been pushing for a second referendum then. So the failure to deliver is not the same, though, as the desire to rejoin and to sign a new treaty would commit us, above all, to joining the euro. That isn't going to happen. But I have to say, like many millions of others, I'm extremely disappointed with the way in which it's been delivered.
OK, thank you, Nigel. Nigel
Always
Farage
enjoy.
there. Of course, you can see him on GB News tonight at 7 p.m. Now, breaking news, Daniel Khalif has appeared in court, charged with escaping from prison, and more detail has emerged about how he broke out of Wandsworth. Let's go now to our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Good morning, Mark. What do we know?
Good morning. Yes, hi. It was just a very brief first hearing here at Westminster Magistrates Court, just 50 minutes for Daniel Khalif, who wore a prison-issue grey tracksuit. He was flanked by 2 uniformed police officers and a prison officer, and he spoke really only to confirm his name and his date of birth. Now, in the court hearing itself, the court was told that it's alleged that he escaped from Wandsworth Prison last Wednesday, that a food delivery lorry was used in that escape, and that strapping had been used to hold Daniel Khalif underneath that vehicle. Now, the strapping, according to what we heard in court, may have been strapping of material used in bed sheets. Now, as far as the ongoing case is concerned, he's been remanded back into custody. He'll appear again at the Central Criminal Court, the Old Bailey, on the 29th of September. This case, you'll remember, of course, from last Wednesday, sparked a nationwide manhunt after it became clear to the prison authorities that Daniel Khalif had disappeared in custody within Wandsworth Prison. That involved, of course, a nationwide hunt that closed, or not closed, but added to security around ports and airports across the country. We had a number of sightings and, of course, a very big search of Richmond Park, that 2,500-acre park, on Thursday night into Friday morning, and then there was those sightings on Saturday, again allegedly of Daniel Khalif, by that time having changed clothing, and then a little later in the morning, just before 11 a.m. on the Saturday morning, according to the police, Daniel Khalif arrested as he cycled up Canal towpath in Northfield, Northolt, I should say, which is in West London. So we're just awaiting, actually, the armoured police van, which took him here this morning to leave Westminster Magistrates Court. That was escorted by 2 unmarked police vehicles as well. Of course, we know, because we've been told, that he won't be heading back to Wandsworth Prison, an undisclosed prison that escort will head to when it leaves here in the coming minutes.
OK, thank you, Mark.
That's Mark White, who is our Home and Security editor. Some more breaking news. So this is the parliamentary researcher arrested on suspicion of spying for China has insisted he's completely innocent. He says he spent his career highlighting the challenges and threats presented by the Chinese Communist Party.
In a statement released through his lawyers, the researcher, who has not officially been named by the police, said, "I feel forced to respond to the media accusations that I am a Chinese spy. It is wrong that I should be obliged to make any form of public comment on the misreporting that has taken place. However, given what has been reported, it is vital that it is known that I am completely innocent. I've spent my career to date trying to educate others about the challenge and threats presented by the Chinese Communist Party. To do what has been claimed against me in extravagant news reporting will be against everything that I stand for."
Interesting. So we're going to talk now to Aaron Bastani, who's co-founder of Novara Media, to talk about Chinese spies. Aaron, very good to talk to you. Just as this news has just broken, this parliamentary researcher protesting his innocence. We're not going to name him. We have a name, but we can't be absolutely clear if it's the right one. How serious is it, though, if it is true that we do have a Chinese spy in the very heart of our parliament? We had problem with volume. Well, it's quite unusual. So this young man who's, we say we can't go into detail, but he's denying it's him. Of course he would say that. He was, just so you know, he was arrested back in March, released on bail, so he's free to go about his own business. There may be bail conditions at which time he might have to report to the police station or something like that. We don't know that. But we can go back to Aaron Bastani. Aaron, we'll try again. Hi there. I was asking how serious it is to have a spy potentially in the very heart of our parliament.
Well, I'm just going to ask you how you're doing this morning.
Very well, thank you.
Very good. Yeah, it's really extraordinary. Look, we've spent the best part of a week discussing Daniel Khalif, and that gentleman, by comparison, this is very much amateur hour. Obviously, these just remain allegations. Nothing's been proven. I don't believe he's being charged or anything. But it would be very, very significant for China to have an espionage asset working at Westminster in close proximity to politicians who have a particular interest on policy relating to China. A paradigmatic example being Tom Tugendhat, seen as something of a China hawk. And this particular individual is said to have had some proximity to him. It wasn't working for him, but connections with Mr. Tugendhat prior to him running for the Tory leadership. So that is really significant, and it would show actually a very high level of competence with regards to Chinese espionage. This gentleman, again, it's presumed that he was perhaps brought into the fold after travelling to China shortly after graduating as a student. Again, that would be quite impressive if over a period of years he managed to get this kind of position at Westminster. Of course, not yet proven, but if the allegations are true, I think it would be one of the bigger breaches with regards to parliamentary security and national security that I can think of in recent years.
Well, it feels, Aaron, doesn't it, that we obviously have a complicated relationship with China, and it feels like at any minute you think the government might make the statement that's being called for today to define them as a threat to this country. They won't do that, though, at the moment, because we have so much commercial, financial trade links with China. Do you think this government understands where this relationship could possibly go in the future?
Well, it was interesting because I heard a few moments ago China being sort of a threat to our, our economic security. I mean, I would have to push back on that a little bit, and that's why nothing happens, right? That's why no major steps are taken. That's why Rishi Sunak supplicates on the international stage when this story emerges. Because frankly, if we think that inflation was high as a result of Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine, we ain't seen nothing yet if we try and decouple from China. You would see inflation of 15, 20, 25%. Pretty much everything we buy today is manufactured in China. If you get a kitchen renovation, all the little appliances from the cupboards to the taps, to the wiring, to the windows, all of that is made in China. And talk of a decarbonisation strategy, for instance, all the solar panels, lithium batteries, wind turbines, all manufactured in China. So that's a huge problem here. Politicians can't be that honest about it because the economic overhead is massive.
Aaron, we should also remember, of course, we're probably doing exactly the same, if we can, maybe not as effectively, in China as we are in other countries. In other words, we have our own spies, intelligence operatives working undercover, doing exactly the same as what this person who denies he's doing, but has certainly been accused of doing in Parliament today.
That's absolutely right. Britain's very... perhaps it doesn't quite live up to the stereotypes of James Bond or whatnot, but it's diplomatic and its espionage services are respected around the world. So there is an element of tit for tat here. But like I said a few moments ago, the idea that you have an asset at the heart of Westminster who's reaching out to politicians who might be quite hawkish on China, who might say, look, we need to rethink our relations with China, economic, cultural, political. The fact that he would be in such an extraordinary position of leverage and influence would show a very, very, very effective strategy on the part of the Chinese. Not yet proven, of course, but if that is the case, in a way it's impressive.
We've got the TUC conference going on at the moment. Obviously, if Labour get in the next election, the TUC are going to become even more powerful, aren't they? We're going to see more strikes. It would be more of a problem for the British people.
That's a really interesting question. You know, I think in a way, perhaps not, or perhaps, I really don't know. So I think there's an element of when you have a Labour government, that the Labour movement, people who are perhaps politically aligned with Labour, they're less likely to kick up a fuss. You know, if you look at Frances O'Grady, the former leader of the TUC, I think she's now in the Lords. You know, there is that conveyor belt historically. Or Brendan Barber, previously head of the TUC. You know, I think he was elevated in a similar way. So there is definitely a variable at work with regards to a Labour government, that trade unions tend to be a little bit less aggy than they are with a Tory one. However, I think this might be a little bit different over the next several years because, of course, we are coming out of a period of quite low growth, medium to high inflation. And what that means is that if people want better living standards, there are going to be what economists call distributional conflicts. We don't have growth, so we can just have a bigger pie and we can apportion out different slices to different parts of the population. No, when you have no growth, medium to high inflation, all of a sudden, class politics and distributional conflicts become a thing. And I think, frankly, actually, that's something that Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves haven't really thought about. I think they look at governing as something of a reenactment of 1997 to 2010. And the general context of when they come to government, when they come to power, if they come to power next year, is going to be very different. So I don't know, Beverly. It could be one or the other.
All right, thank you. Aaron Bastani there, co-founder of Novara Media.
Well, still to come, we're going to be talking by the Conservative MP Tim Loughton, who was sanctioned by China because of his hardline views on Beijing. You're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com? You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, "Nana, stop arguing." I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the people's channel and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
And it's 11:29 with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner.
So joining us now is Conservative MP for East Worthing and Shoreham, Tim Lawton, to talk to us about the allegation of there being a Chinese spy within Parliament having access to MPs such as Tom Tugendhat and Alicia Kearns. How seriously should we take this allegation, Tim? I'm not sure whether Tim can hear us. Can you hear us, Tim?
No, we've lost him.
I think we've lost him. We're going to try and...
No,
I think
he's
he's there.
Tim, are you there?
I'm here. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Bev was just saying, how seriously should we take this allegation? Right in the heart of government, working closely with Alicia Kearns, the chairman of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, linked to Tom Tugendhat, who, of course, is a great hawk on China.
Okay,
as are you.
This is really serious. Well, I don't think I'm a great hawk on China. I was sanctioned, contrary to what you said earlier, Andrew, because I got up with a long number of colleagues and called out the human rights abuses on a massive scale that China has been committing and called for changes to legislation to reflect that. If that makes me...
Oh, I think we're having a problem with the line. We really want to hear what Tim has to say.
It's in Parliament. That's the Chinese. Interrupting. Blame the Chinese.
I don't think they are. I mean, it would be nice to...
Interesting, but Tim was saying it is serious, and he was saying that he was sanctioned because he had the temerity to attack China's human rights record. Human rights record, look what they've done in Hong Kong, and look what they're doing to the Uyghur Muslims. They're killing them.
Absolutely.
They've been accused of genocide.
Let's go to what you're saying at home, shall we? We showed you the tweet earlier that Rishi Sunak posted at the G20 summit, and Davis said the Prime Minister stood with Modi in front of the slogan, "One Earth, one family, one future." To me, that reads New World Order, World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, which is what Nigel Farage was saying, United Nations. In other words, it is communism.
Yeah.
I think you're right, Dave.
Yeah, and more coming in?
Yep, Peter has said on the political parties, Nigel says that globalism takes away our right to vote for who we want. Alas, there is an election next year, and can you please tell me who on earth from the leaders we have can I honestly vote for? Who the heck do I vote for to get us out of this mess? There is nobody.
Well, that's very depressing that people think like that. So, look, the time's coming up to 11:31. Here's the headlines with Ray Addison.
Thank you both. Good morning. 11:31, our top stories. The parliamentary researcher accused of spying for China says he is completely innocent. The man, who has not been officially named, was arrested in March. Speaking through his lawyers, he says he spent his career highlighting threats presented by the Chinese Communist Party. It comes as the PM faced calls to designate China as a national security threat. UK authorities have told GB News they are currently pursuing around 800 live terror investigations. It's understood the majority relate to lone individuals, but there are also more organised plots and threats from state actors. It comes 22 years after the 9/11 terror attack, in which more than 2,750 people were killed. A terror suspect who escaped from Wandsworth Prison last week has been remanded in custody after appearing in court. 21-year-old former soldier Daniel Khalif was arrested in West London on Saturday morning after a 4-day manhunt. Khalif escaped while awaiting trial after being charged with terror offences in January. British search and rescue teams have been deployed to Morocco following the deadly earthquake which struck on Friday. The Foreign Office says 60 specialists are in the North African country, along with search dogs and rescue equipment. More than 2,100 people have died as a result of the 6.8 magnitude quake. And a last-ditch attempt at a bailout by HMV to rescue retailer Wilko has failed, throwing thousands of jobs into doubt. Administrators for the high street chain had been in discussions over a deal to buy around 200 stores. However, those talks have now collapsed. Wilko, which employed around 12,500 staff, had previously announced a £13 million deal with B&M. You can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Just time for a snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.2521 and 1.1671 euros. Price of gold is £1,538 and 11 pence per ounce, and the FTSE 100's at 7,499 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Still to come this morning, John Lewis has called for a royal commission to save our high streets. Would it work? Is it necessary? This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. A series of fronts are pushing their way southeastwards across the UK today. Ahead of these, there will be the risk of some showers, potentially thundery too, and whilst it is turning cooler, there's still some hot air across parts of the southeast ahead of the fronts that are making their way in from the northwest. And behind the fronts will be something a little bit cooler. Also quite a bit of rain on those fronts too, so a fairly wet picture across many northern northwestern parts of the UK. Staying a little bit drier further south, but potential for a few showers to kick off, and these could perhaps turn thundery. In the southeast, where we're still in that hot air, temperatures are likely to get into the high 20s, so not quite as hot as it has been recently, but still fairly hot for the time of year. Elsewhere, starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, a bit cooler as the air comes in behind those fronts. Through this evening and overnight, further rain making its way southeastwards across many parts of England and into Wales, but in the southeast, staying ahead of that front, and here we could see some heavy, perhaps even thundery showers pushing in from near France. Temperatures not dropping particularly low across many southern parts, staying in the high teens for some, but cooler, more comfortable sleeping across more northern areas here. As we go through Tuesday, this front then is gradually going to push its way southeastwards. I emphasise gradually because in the southeast we'll stay ahead of it through much of the day, and the potential still for some heavy thundery downpours here. Further north and west though, some bright sunny spells, but turning more comfortable, cooler than it has been through some recent days. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know,
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point. But and action.
Read my superstar panel that are already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views, and often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton, for 2 hours packed full of unfiltered opinions, unique takes, and fiery debates. I guarantee you blockbuster guests and exclusive reporting with no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I think there is a culture of collusion, quite frankly.
And no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio, and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 10:40. No, it is.
11:40.
It's 11:40. When you're having such a good time. Oh, no, that's the other way around, isn't it?
No, time flies when you're having fun. No, that's right.
Yeah, you're with Britain's News on GB News, Andrew Pierce and Bev Turner, and our fabulous panel.
Now, what would you do? Sarah Vine is here and Bush Rochet. Good morning, ladies, again. We all can see that the high street is in an absolute mess. Wherever you live, Bushra, there are shops boarded up, there are charity shops popping up everywhere on our high street. There's nothing wrong with that, but it denotes the fact that there is no money to be made in that property. John Lewis has asked for a royal commission to breathe life into our high streets. Are they right? What do we do? Do we just give up? Everyone's shopping online.
We can't give up. I used to love the high street personally. It was like bustling, people getting together. It's the social part of it. I believe the high street can definitely have a revamp. We just need to change the way that it looks. We've got coffee culture. We've got this social aspect of it. It's about bringing people together again. I don't like this idea that we don't have high streets anymore.
No, me neither.
You know, and we need to change it. We need to bring people back in. When Sarah and I were discussing this, we were saying that gone are the days that anybody wants to go and shop for clothes on the high street. We're not doing that anymore. We can do that online. It's cheaper.
Oh, I do.
Do you?
Yeah.
Really?
It's one day a year.
Very old, Andrew.
Oh, crawl.
No, I think the thing is, we've been here before. Do you not remember about 10 or 15 years ago, there was a big hoo-ha about Save Our High Street?
Yeah.
I think it was Mary Portas was putting it
Yes, that went well, didn't it?
So the high street has been dying for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And the internet is obviously the culprit because so much can now be bought online. I think, we both live in Chiswick, I think we can say.
Yeah, we can say that.
And actually, Chiswick has a really thriving high street. And I think the secret to that is that it has lots of independent shops.
Yes, right.
And it's got a lot of variety.
Yeah.
And it's quite quirky. And there's actually quite a lot to do there. That's not just it's just not cookie cutter stuff. And I think in the 90s, the high street became very similar everywhere. The same shops, same things, blah, blah, blah. And I think people got rather bored of that. And I think the reason that Chiswick works is because there's a lot to do. You know, you can go and spend a nice, happy day on the high street. You can have a sort of lunch, a coffee, buy some stuff, take your groceries home. It's all very sort of localised. And I think this is the key. I think these great big expanses of sort of shopping deserts are not what really people want. I like shopping on Chiswick High Street because I can do my shopping on a daily basis and just walk home with my bags. I don't have to get the car out. And I think that's quite important.
But the idea of a Royal Commission, we all know what that means. That'll take 3 or 4 years.
20 years.
Yeah. We'll probably have a different monarch.
About 5 billion.
A Royal Commission when King Charles is on there. Probably Prince William would be on the throne by the time it reports, by which time the high street would have gone.
Yeah, exactly.
Waste of time, isn't it?
Completely.
And it's desperate.
And I think that, maybe Dame Sharon is particularly...
This is the woman who runs John Lewis. Who, by the way, knows nothing about retail, came into John Lewis from Ofcom, the regulator. What's that got to do with retail? High Street?
Very nice
Nothing.
woman. Very nice woman, but I think she is
Wonder why she got that job.
And I mean, there is something to be said about the tourist tax, which the Daily Mail has been very vocal about. So, you know, there are things that the government can do, but I don't think you need a royal commission to work it out.
Ridiculous.
I mean, it's just common sense.
And also, I think it's one of these social trends that we see all the time, which is leaving behind the elderly. I don't put you in that category, despite what Sarah Vine says about you. Because a lot of people do still like to buy.
They do.
In person.
Have a conversation with the assistant. Does it look all right in this? Is my backside too big in this?
Never.
That was a lot of girls say, I would say, rather than men.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, there's another thing. Parking is so expensive now, which doesn't help high streets. If you can find anywhere to park, you don't need Sadiq Khan with his blimmin' ultra-low emission zone, which is spreading all over the country. Taxes on cars. People like to drive in because then they can load up the car and drive home.
That would help. Shoplifting is a big issue. I mean, shoplifters is a big issue. We've got all these companies now putting cameras on their employees and stuff. You know, it's very difficult if you're running a small business and someone's coming in and nicking your stuff. That's a big hole in your profits. I mean, a lot of the shops around me now close their doors and you have to ring a doorbell to get in.
Yeah, and do they limit the number of people who go in the shop?
No, I mean, they don't do that. But the point is they can't just have their doors open because people will just...
Isn't that terrible?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
And that sort of brings us to our next story, actually, Bushra, which is about the fact that supermarkets are going to start paying the police to help catch shoplifters. But in order to do so, we're all going to have our faces scanned in the supermarket. We haven't thought this through.
No, we haven't. And I really hope that they don't do that. I particularly do not want to have my face scanned in any supermarket that I go to. I do know that there is a pandemic and a rise of shoplifting. It's happening in my area as well. There's even signposted saying, be warned, there are shoplifters here. And that's scary. But then at the same time, I get why. I think people are just so desperate. We're in a very desperate situation. But and it's hard because how do we combat this? On one hand, we do want the high streets to come back. We know that shoplifting's happening because people don't have money to buy things.
Well, no, I don't think it's... Well, some of them don't have money, but some of them are just doing it because they know they get away with it and the police aren't interested in
No, I mean, around where I live, a lot of it is to do with drugs and other sorts of abuse. I mean, the thing is that we already do pay the police to supposedly catch criminals, don't we? So
but apparently, we didn't know the other day, they're only going to get involved if if the theft involves something above £200 or more.
We see that's what's that isn't that what happened in America?
Yeah.
In San Francisco, that the governor of San Francisco or whoever it was who runs San Francisco, the mayor, whatever, decided that they wouldn't prosecute shoplifting offences under $700.
Yeah,
I think it was
it's outrageous.
Something like that. And as a result,
there was an explosion.
It's literally free for all. People
of course
just,
it is.
But they had thieves going round shops with calculators. Their phones, working out what they could still to stay underneath the budget.
And if particularly if you're running a small family-run corner shop, someone nicks a jar of coffee. A jar of coffee now can be 10 quid. That's a big hole.
Yeah,
it really is. And the fact that they're going to have to pay the police to do their job when we're already paying them through our wages is crazy.
I mean, I know some of the biggest stores and the brands have the guards that stand outside, don't they, already? You know, that's kind of like a deterrent for them to warn you to say.
Is it?
Yeah,
they look half asleep.
Yeah, and
then you hear the thing go off, the alarm goes off, and nobody moves.
Follows. No, and there was this video I watched actually, which was incredible. They walked in with an actual trolley, just took whatever they wanted and walked out with the trolley. Yeah. People were watching it happen, and that's becoming more frequent.
The other thing to say about supermarkets is they have slightly shot themselves in the foot because in order to try and save yet more money and to make more money for their shareholders, they've got rid of checkout people. Yeah. So now quite a lot of shoplifting, I think, just happens at those automatic tills where people just
keep walking past.
Exactly. So maybe they could try and bring back some human beings.
Yeah, I don't understand why they encourage you to go not to. So why do you want me to go to the automated thing? Why are you trying to do yourself out of a job?
Yeah. So they can take pictures of you, Andrew, on their secret phone.
I don't want to take a picture unless I'm looking okay that day.
Yeah, I discuss that with the shop workers whenever I see them and I ask them that question, why do you want me to go over there? And they say, well, we have more time to stack the shelves. And I said, that's not a proper job. You want to be talking to me, don't do yourself out of a job because soon, and also, a robot will be stacking the shelf.
But then also, if they're not there to help you and process your food, right, and you want to stack shelves, then why are people still shoplifting? Because clearly you have more time on your hands to see what's going on. So you could do 2 or 3 jobs.
Do they still have store detectives, you think, in supermarkets?
No.
Do you not think that happens anymore? When I was a kid doing my
they used to have
student in Sainsbury's, you'd spot the sort, and you'd have to leg it because she'd point and we'd catch them. It was rather exciting, actually. Rugby tackling them.
Well, Wandsworth Prison was obviously in the press all last week, still over the weekend, with the escaped alleged terrorist, genius, criminal mastermind that Sarah and I think is probably just a young idiot.
Who Bev Turner tried personally to catch.
I tried my best.
She tried to apprehend him
but there's
her teenage daughter.
There's now a man in a critical condition, Bushra, who's been stabbed in Wandsworth Prison over the weekend. It's kind of all clearly kicking off there.
I think this happens all the time in prison, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, this is something, Andrew's right, this is something that happens in prisons all the time. I was actually having this discussion generally to say that, you know, is it time that we really need to look at prison guards, you know, also the number of inmates that we have, is there enough space? You know, are we doing this right? Is this, you know, does this need to have a totally different
You could remove 7,000 foreign prisoners from our jails, deport them. That would help a lot.
Well,
they keep saying they're going to do it, and they never do. Am I right, Sarah?
Well, no, because then that would activate some massive human rights thing,
Of course it would, but, you know...
I mean, the thing is, I think our jails are massively overcrowded.
They are.
And the problem is there hasn't really been any investment for years and years and years. But again, it comes back to this infrastructure problem, which we're seeing in, you know, with RAC and schools and everything. If you don't invest in your infrastructure, eventually these problems come back to bite you. And the trouble with prisons is it's a particularly difficult area for government to put money into, because of course nobody wants to put money into prisons.
Yeah, can you imagine a local MP saying that we're going to invest 300 million in the local community, we're building a prison in the local community. So, that's going to go down
so these old, I mean, Wandsworth is a classic example of an old Victorian prison, which, you know, really is past its sell-by date. It's very hard to keep people in sort of good, decent conditions there. They weren't built for that. And, you know, they're understaffed, undermanaged. There's too many people who shouldn't be there.
And its nickname is apparently Car Phone Warehouse because it's so easy to get a mobile phone into the prison. And hand them around and sell them to each other.
And some of the prisons now, they fly the drugs in little drones over the walls, so the prison officers are clearly turning a blind eye. Not bad-mouthing prison officers, but some of them...
The prison officers will be thinking, you know, what is the least bad solution here? Because they can't make, you know, perfection the enemy of the good. They've got very limited resources, so they will let stuff through that they don't need. And of course, you know, that's a slippery slope.
I mean, what I'd like to add about this particular story as well is that I think also not all prisoners are bad people. They might have done a crime and they're in this. So we've got all sorts of prisoners in there. And I just feel like we're at this point, especially with the funding, where we're not seeing them as sort of human anymore. It's kind of put them in there and forget about them.
But also, I guess, when you're in a public sector, when you've got a pay squeeze, it's unattractive to be thinking we'll invest lots more millions to make prisoners' lives better. That's not going to happen, is it?
We've got to read a statement from HMP Wandsworth in relation to the stabbing. They say, we have a zero-tolerance approach to violence and will always take strong action against those who break the rules.
And of course, there is an inquiry underway as to how that bloke got out of there. I thought we knew.
Last story, Bushra, this morning. More than half of young people take time off work with mental health. Is this because they are genuinely unwell, or have we created a generation of snowflakes with absolutely zero resilience?
The latter, of course.
I was going to say the
bunch of flakes is the generation.
Well said, Bushra.
We used to work incredibly hard. It took us time to get to places. You know, we earn our positions and our spaces. What is going on? I think it's this internet culture. Honestly, it's too much time on the screens, not enough time outside, not enough time in the real world. This is what hard work looks like. It's a snowflake generation.
I mean, it's also COVID. It's also they've got this notion that actually they don't really need to be in the office.
That's right.
But I think this idea when we were growing up, when I was growing up, you know, if someone had said to me mental health, I wouldn't have known what they were talking about. There's an element where if you talk about something to the point where it sort of becomes stitched into your experience. It's sort of self-fulfilling
we hear it all the time.
I mean, you know, we all have duvet days. We all wake up in the morning feeling miserable and not wanting to go to work. It's just, you know, it's a question of whether you allow yourself or not.
And it's the ace card, unfortunately, for these teenagers who don't want to go to work.
Mental health.
They know they can say to their boss, it's my mental health. And the boss then doesn't doesn't have a leg to stand on. They have to let them have a day off.
It's overuse. I mean, terminology when it comes to mental health, all these different terms that they've got. Sometimes I feel like it's almost a brand, a culture that exists within these young people to use it as excusability for their behaviour and just being lazy. And, you know, and so I don't know. I really feel like something has to be done because we don't have a bunch of youngsters who are suffering with mental health. Mental health is an actual crisis.
Yeah,
a real situation.
but they use it because it makes them untouchable.
It does. Oh, gosh.
It does. What have we done, eh?
Yeah.
It's a little bit bleak, isn't it? Right, thank you for all of your contributions this morning. Thank you, Sarah Vine. Thank you, Bush
We've got through a whole programme without talking about Prince Harry. Maybe we'll
I'm
talk
so
about that
bored of
tomorrow.
Prince Harry.
I know, well, I am.
At all.
I agree with you.
I literally couldn't be interested less.
I agree with you.
Well, that's it
And
from
her.
us for today. Thank you so much. We'll be back tomorrow morning at 9:30. But next, it's the live desk with Mark Longcoast and Pip Thompson. Mark is here to tell us what's coming up. What have you got today, Mark?
Well, we've got some Chinese whispers for you. How many more spies could be at the heart of government, we'll be asking the Speaker to address the Commons this afternoon as lawyers for one accused researcher says he is completely innocent. Also coming up, British rescue teams heading to Morocco as a race against time gets underway to find any more survivors high up in the Atlas Mountains. The powerful earthquake so far claiming more than 2,000 lives. Also, the £600 million Mini. Yes, a huge investment in British electric car production, but how much has the government given to BMW to get it all on the road?
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good day to you. A series of fronts are pushing their way southeastwards across the UK today. Ahead of these, there will be the risk of some showers, potentially thundery too, and whilst it is turning cooler, there's still some hot air across parts of the southeast ahead of the fronts that are making their way in from the northwest. And behind the fronts will be something a little bit cooler. Also quite a bit of rain on those fronts too, so a fairly wet picture across many northern northwestern parts of the UK. Staying a little bit drier further south, but potential for a few showers to kick off, and these could perhaps turn thundery. In the southeast, where we're still in that hot air, temperatures are likely to get into the high 20s, so not quite as hot as it has been recently, but still fairly hot for the time of year. Elsewhere, starting to feel a little bit more comfortable, a bit cooler as the air comes in behind those fronts. Through this evening and overnight, further rain making its way southeastwards across many parts of England and into Wales, but in the southeast, staying ahead of that front, and here we could see some heavy, perhaps even thundery showers pushing in from near France. Temperatures not dropping particularly low across many southern parts, staying in the high teens for some, but cooler, more comfortable sleeping across more northern areas here. As we go through Tuesday, this front then is gradually going to push its way southeastwards. I emphasise gradually because